I'll do my best, Colleen, to do you justice. I became aware of Colleen and kind of checked out her LinkedIn profile, and sort of funny-ish anecdote. Made a very small attempt to try and recruit her, and we exchanged a few LinkedIn messages and a couple of voicemails, and never really took it any farther than that. But her reputation preceded her as a really awesome Agilist, and so it's great to have her join us here today. Colleen's been very engaged in leadership roles in Agile Denver and was chairwoman of the 2016 and 2017 Mile High Agile conferences. So if you participated in that, you probably saw Colleen up in front of the whole crowd and the big podium kicking off the conference. And I was there one of those 2 years. She is now, most people aspire maybe at some point in their career to be a CEO at some point. Colleen's not happy with just one, but she's now CEO of 2 entities at the same time. So that's pretty epic. So there's one other cool thing that I vaguely remember, Colleen, about your background, and I'll tee it up and you can tell me that's not me, or yes, it was this. But I seem to recall that there was something that you were like maybe the first in the world or one of the first handful in the world to be like double accredited in something to do with Kanban.
It was probably through Lean Kanban University. So the Kanban coaching professional. At one point, there were like only 80 people worldwide. So not the only one, but one of few.
All right.
I'll take that. Does that count?
All that to say that Colleen is awesome. And all right. With that, take it away, Colleen, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I'm psyched to be here and very excited about this topic.
Jackpot.
Okay, so we're going to talk about running scaled retrospectives, and this is going to be like 90% storytelling, 10% things to try, which hopefully for everyone here that resonates more, especially at 6 o'clock on a Thursday night in the middle of a pandemic in code red-ish purple if you're in Denver. Or whatever, wherever we're at now. Randy, you did an awesome job on intros. So since you shared most of my professional career with everybody, I'll say I have 3 kids, and right now I love them most of the time. And the other part of the time, we're all yelling at each other. And like last night, we talked about the need for everybody just having quiet time alone. It's like, it's okay to acknowledge you need time by yourself. Other random, let's see. I grew up in Colorado in a town of 75 people, 75 period, not 7,500, just 75 full stop. I did 4-H and I raised goats and sheep and rabbits. And what else? Lynn, I feel like we got to co-chair together, so you probably know more weird stuff about me than most. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. My birthday is on Christmas Day, and I was born in a cabin on top of the comics, kind of like puppies. Like if you've ever seen puppies be born, that's how I came into the world. And my parents closed off my umbilical cord with a roach clip. So Colorado, everything you need to know. All right. So storytelling time. I started Scatterspoke with my husband, and we started our business, which is an online retrospective tool, because he wanted to learn Node.js and some React and wanted to learn some new technology skills. I was consulting, and he was like, what's a thing I could build? And I was like, I don't know. It seems like every time we have a retro, it gets punted or rescheduled, or I frantically try to gather feedback from everybody because it's Friday afternoon and everybody wants to leave early. And so what if we tried to make a retro tool where everybody can add feedback all the time? We started this in 2015, and we got funding this last year for an accelerator program and are officially full-time scatterspoke employees, both of us, which is something I never thought I'd be able to say. And it feels pretty amazing. And in the last year, we were interviewing customers and we were asking specifically engineering managers, what is something that scatterspoke and having scaled retrospectives helped you with? And this is a quote from an engineering manager that I think honestly changed the way we looked at our business. He said to us, they had no idea how many teams were struggling with the exact same problem. And that's pretty powerful when you think about it for a minute, because we spend so much of our time gathering feedback from our team and helping our teams improve that sometimes it's hard to see the forest through the trees, right? And when you think about a big organization and a big company and how much they're spending to be agile and to help individual teams improve, connecting these dots is not often part of what that focus looks like. So buckle up. We're going to have a fully Giphy loaded presentation here. But I want to talk about feedback, and I want to talk about feedback at all levels of the organization, what this looks like, and how in some ways we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot as shooting ourselves in the feet as Scrum Masters when we're only trying to optimize our team alone. So I don't need to tell this audience what a retrospective is, but that's our regular opportunity where our team comes together and we talk about what's working and what's not working, and we identify opportunities for improvement. Why we retro, though, is much greater than that. And I often say, like, part of this is about, part of it is about improvement, 100%. And we're trying to find opportunities to improve and work better. We're also figuring out, the forming, storming, norming dynamics of a team, and how does our team learn to communicate? It's almost like a relationship or a marriage, right? You're trying to learn how to fight in a healthy way and raise concerns and talk about things that are sometimes uncomfortable, and that's okay. I think when I coach teams, what I often focus on in retros is also giving teams ownership of the process. So I do a lot of Kanban coaching, as Randy said at the beginning, and it's funny, I work with a lot of clients where I think I probably drive them a little crazy because I let the teams have so much control of the process that they're like, I thought you were here to tell them they couldn't work on so much. And I'm like, well, I'd rather let them work on 10 things a piece and find out the hard way. This is probably from having kids, right? But I'm like, let's let them find out the hard way that that's too much work. But I feel like the teams, when they get to experiment and try things on their own, and sometimes it's a good change and sometimes it's a painful change, they own the process and they're really bought into those changes they're making. And that's part of what we're trying to instill when we run a retrospective. We're trying to give that team ownership of the process and what they're working on. And we're making sure they feel heard. We're making sure they are present and they feel part of this process. So the next part of this, though, is there's levels to this. And I'm going to use this language. If you work in a scaled agile framework organization, it may look more like team art portfolio. Maybe there's no portfolio where you work and it's team art org or team program org. This isn't going to vary. I'm going to use some generic language here just to level set for all of us. But these tend to be the levels in some abstraction that we're working with inside of our organizations and where we're trying to gather feedback. So let's start with the team. That's where we're probably all the closest. When we look at the team, we're looking about that small group and what behavior does this group, what behavior can this group try to change to improve their performance? I mean, it really just comes down to we're trying to get better at what we do and at how we deliver. What are small tweaks we can make to get us there? And there's a couple different conversations that I think usually come into play when we're looking at team level feedback. And I'd be remiss as a Kanban coach if we didn't break this down into qualitative and quantitative. So let's talk qualitative. I think this is where we tend to sit with a lot of our retrospective feedback, right? So I have a dear, dear friend who I've known for probably, well, she threw my baby shower for my daughter who just turned 12. And she sat as a new Scrum Master in her first retrospective, and then called me after and said, "Is it normal for people to cry in these?" And I said, I realize on paper it probably seems a little weird for these to get that heated, and that's not something you would expect, but yes. I mean, people are talking about their work, and they're talking about their workload, and whether they feel overwhelmed, whether they feel heard, whether they feel like they get an opportunity to contribute and solve problems. And this is all qualitative feedback, right? We have to make space for that. And a lot of times that's what all of our retrospectives are geared towards. Like, how do we create a safe space for that to happen? And I've also had it happen. I've had members of the team break down. I've had them cry. I've had them storm out. I've had people throw a Sharpie, like all gamuts of getting emotional. But that's what that space is for, right? There's a balance to this. So the balance here is quantitative, and wherever you put it inside your retro, what we're also trying to look at a team level is what are the metrics, and what are the what are the indicators basically for this team to help figure out how do we identify where should we improve. Like we could focus on things like maybe committing to less work, or spending more time story pointing, or breaking our work down smaller. But so we're looking at all of this data to help us drive those inputs. And that's just as important. I think it's hard sometimes to find a good balance. And as a Scrum Master or as a coach, probably better than anyone what that team needs in that moment. Sometimes I'll spend half the time looking at data and half the time asking people for retro feedback. Other times I'll go 75-25. It just really depends on what I can feel kind of coming from the team on what they need, and or if I'm trying to steer them one direction or the other without saying that, maybe I'll lean a little heavier on the data to help make that point. So where we end up at the team level here is kind of a combination. We're looking at feelings and at data, and we're saying, when you hear things like, I feel like we got slower, and you can ask, how do you know? Like, what were the indications that things got faster or slower? What evidence do you have that we delivered more, delivered less, or that we're stuck? I like to ask, how can we track if we're improving, right? Because you'll hear a lot of kind of vague language around how do, let's get better at this, or let's get faster at this. And what we're looking for here is like, how will we know, right? And how do you combine feeling more efficient with showing that you're more efficient? And both of these are very, very true for what we're driving towards in a team level retrospective. But I think in a lot of ways, this breaks down for us. And we focus so much on what I'll call local optimization here that I think sometimes we can do it at the expense of other teams. And I've been on both ends of this, right? I've been on the lowest performing team, maybe on paper, where they're struggling, or there's personality conflicts, or we're having a hard time communicating. And it feels like you can't dig out of that hole because all these other teams are doing so well, right? Almost to the expense of your team succeeding. And vice versa. You may have been a part of a team where it feels like your team is really shining, and they're communicating, and their retros are great, and they're picking things to improve, and they're folding them into the next sprint, and they're delivering, they're meeting their sprint commitments. But what can happen here is we become so internally focused on our Scrum team and on our Scrum team getting better, we're not paying attention to the impact that that's having outside of our teams. And that's kind of an important part when we think about our organization more holistically, because all of this is so interconnected. So I'm going to jump up a level here to portfolio feedback. And I think you can extrapolate this down to an art or a program or a portfolio, but kind of the middle here, not organization level, not team level. We're talking like the in-between, right? Where what we're seeking to improve now becomes more about coordination and dependencies and collaboration, and how do we all work together to figure out how we deliver as a unit. And this is I'm gonna sum this up in 4 slides. This is so hard to do well. I'm not trying to sweep this part under the rug. I think that when we look at a lot of what we do as coaches, I feel like this is where where the rubber meets the road. Like this is a very hard thing to do well and to make teams feel like a cohesive unit and part of a group at the same time, because there can be friction there. So the first thing we're trying to do here is connect the dots. I feel like I spent a lot of sick days as a kid watching Three's Company. So Three's Company and I Dream of Jeannie. But what we're trying to do here is figure out how do we connect these dots. And we have to start to connect the output of team level retros. And we need to do it without breaking team trust, but there's a lot to be learned here. One of my current clients, we have a scrum of scrums. And so we've also added a retro of retros. So at the end of every sprint, we have a 30-minute call where all the scrum masters come together, and we don't say, so-and-so said this or this person said this, but we bubble up key themes. And we just touch base briefly on some of the key themes that came out of the sprint retro. So we can see if there's some bigger issues that we need to address or escalate in the organization. And I think this is an important step, right? One of the things you hear teams say a lot is we can't fix that. It's outside of our control, right? We can only fix the stuff that we control. This is someone else's problem. I can't fix it. And so what we're trying to do is find those common patterns, right? Those things that all the teams are struggling with and raise them up. And then sometimes the team does not have control over those things. I think that's sometimes a valid sentiment from the team. And so we have to look at how do we find the right people that can, right? If you can raise that issue up in the organization. The next part here is that I think that a lot of our retros at this level can tend to be really disconnected. And so one of the things that happens a lot is if you think of what we're doing at a team level, we're reviewing data every 2 weeks, and then we're often not getting together to talk about a portfolio or an art or a program level retro, except for every 3 months, 12 weeks, 3 months. Like these don't happen frequently. And so the other piece of this is we have to make sure that the data that we're collecting from the teams gets compiled, and like that we're pulling all of this together, making it easy to collect both the quantitative and the qualitative. I think sometimes when we look at a long period of time, it's easier to lean on quantitative over qualitative. And I think you have to make sure you're pulling things from the teams over a long period of time and then making space to review that so that you're not waiting so long to dig into the data at the team level. So this is a little bit of a combination of the priority of these issues from the teams and transparency over time into what's happening. So, how are we tracking? Maybe if 2 teams are having a problem here and another team isn't, how do we connect those teams? One of the things I like to ask teams is when I feel like a retro is moving more towards a lot of, this team's walking us here and this team can't do, we have no control. And it becomes very like, we're the victims. I like to ask them, what's one thing another team could do to unblock you, or another team could do to help you, or another team could do to remove this issue for you. And that's a great thing to share, right? Because I think teams can feel a little like they can't break free of that. And so asking that in a very transparent way, in a very like point blank, what can these teams do to help remove that blocker for you? I think forces everyone to pause for a second and really answer like, in some cases, I don't know, right? I don't know what the thing is. Like it's easy to point and say someone else is causing this issue for me, but it's harder to answer what can they do to remove it. So you're trying to balance a little bit here of like, what are the issues that you're hearing from multiple teams so that those become more of a priority for the organization, and creating transparency into what those things are. The next one I want to talk about is organizational level feedback. Let's see. I know there's not a great way for me to do this, but I'm going to try. If you have your camera on and you know how to add, if you know how to do your hand, I think you can like raise a hand in your thing, in your picture, even if you don't have your camera on. I want to know how many people have had a full company organizational retrospective. Has anyone? I know, it makes me cry, right? Oh, I see one.
No.
Yeah, it's kind of stupid, right? it's sad to me, right? That this is an expectation for maybe engineering teams, or, you know, I think in general, Agile practices get kind of shoved into a box for engineering teams, and there's so much we could help other parts of the organization with. But this, if nothing else, if you don't take any other part of Agile with you into the rest of the business, take a retro. Like, this is such a powerful thing. And I see this weird kind of cross section with a lot of companies where they do employee surveys, and they're trying to, you know, like at a corporate level, they're reviewing employee surveys once a year, maybe once a quarter. And there's this huge disconnect, I think, between this practice that we're using with Scrum teams and how this can escalate across an organization. And I ask that question of how many of you have seen this, because I haven't seen it much either. And it just makes me sad. I've seen one company one time do a full org retro, and it was super cool and super messy. But everybody loved it, right? Like, everybody loves the opportunity to feel like they're heard and like they're getting to escalate issues that they feel like maybe like that's not going to maybe surface in a 5-answer survey question, right? And so what's super important about the opportunity, if they exist, is to create some visibility. So having, if you can push this, if you have the opportunity to push this in an organization, having visibility into issues that the teams are running into at the program or portfolio level or at the team level creates visibility and alignment across the whole organization. And I think, I'm sure there's a handful of you who've run into also like an OKR or a KPI process that just falls really flat, maybe a couple months after it's implemented. I see that pretty frequently, and I hear that a lot from organizations where they're like, we started with OKRs and we couldn't ever get traction with them. And it's like, well, we start with OKRs or KPIs and we start top down with I think this is the issue. Here's what's broken. Here's what needs fixed. But what we're missing, right, is all this feedback that we've been collecting that could go from the bottom up to actually drive this change. And so at some point, we have to create some visibility for the organization around all of that feedback we're collecting and what can be done with it. The other part here is collective ownership. So I talked a little bit about at the team level, how we're trying to create ownership for the teams around, what does taking some control over your process, right? And being able to say, maybe this isn't maybe this isn't what I would coach to, but I'm going to give the team the autonomy to pick and figure it out. In the organization, I think the same thing is just as important. And I can't tell you how many times in my career I've heard people say, like, we just don't have the control over that, or we don't have that option. We don't have the ability to pick that or do that or choose that tool. And a lot of the practices that we use at a team retro level creates this sense of collective ownership across the organization. So it gives everyone a chance to have that buy-in and voice into how things are working and how they can improve them. So a lot of this is just elevating that conversation from local improvement to more global improvement, and looking at how do we pull from multiple different disciplines. I think when I think about successes here in my career, probably one of my favorites is getting engineering and marketing in the same room. I don't know why there's so much friction there. I do, it's dates. But engineering and marketing together, trying to brainstorm on solutions and how to work together, I think is a very powerful connection of where people can feel like there's a wall and you're throwing things over the fence, and it can be a little combative. And so the more we can start to break that down and try to solution and take a lot of what we do in a retro to a bigger, bigger audience and a bigger conversation, the more impact that's going to have. And this is known as systems thinking. Yay! I feel like if you can't work systems thinking into a conversation, I feel like I've missed my calling in some way. But think about systems thinking as whack-a-mole, right? Like the arcade game of whack-a-mole. And we've got a problem here, and you can hit it as hard as you want with that mallet. It's going to pop up somewhere else. And we have to figure out as coaches, like, how do we look at that whole system and just put a board on top? Right? We don't want any of them to pop up. No, that's probably not the best solution. But when we think about it, we have to think about it more holistically. And we don't want to walk around with our mallet just playing whack-a-mole and trying to address one problem at a time, because it's going to pop up somewhere else. And so from a systems thinking perspective, we want to address how things are working across the whole organization and connect those dots so that we're not optimizing one team at the expense of another. All right, I'm going to pause here and drink wine. And I'm also I have to do like my credit roll Grammy speech for this part of the presentation. So my husband's a developer, but also double majored in electrical engineering. And so I was talking to him earlier this week about how would you explain like this part and this part? And he was like, you can explain it all with electrical engineering terms. And I was like, I'd rather not, if possible. That doesn't really, it's not where I want to go with this. But actually, I love it. So we're going to dig in. Okay, I think to be effective in organizational change and really driving some feedback inside of an organization outside of just our team level retros, we need two things. We need frequency and we need power. And I struggled a lot with using the word power here because I think it has a little bit of a negative tone for us in the Agile community. And I'm going to dig into it instead. I'm going to embrace this because I think it actually has an important meaning here. So if we take the levels that I talked about earlier in terms of the levels of feedback that we collect inside of the organization, I said we have team and program or art and portfolio, organization. We have these kind of tiers, right? We spend all of this time getting feedback from our teams and optimizing our teams. And occasionally we go up one level. And then a lot of times that's where we stop. Right? I only saw one thumbs up for an org level retro. How about like portfolio? Does anybody do portfolio level? See, Sally's semi-nodding. Right? I mean, I would agree. I think that that's typically where things stall. And I think a little bit of that is a very prescriptive cadence around some of these things. And it's, that's where I think we step in and try to drive some of this up, right? So let's start with frequency. So if we use our electrical engineering terms, frequency is going to be the rate at which feedback is provided. And this sunk in pretty quickly for me. So if we think about the rate of feedback, and we use the same chart where we have team, art, portfolio, organization. Think of how often we're gathering feedback from our teams. We get feedback from them every 2 weeks, right? And what often happens with this feedback is we hear patterns. And that was, you hear, we don't have automated QA, or we don't have a continuous deployment pipeline, right? You hear the same things over and over for teams as a blocker. And then what happens is we often do a release train retro or a program level retro. Those might be, I would say on the more frequent side, I've seen them like every 8 weeks, but I think pretty typically they're 10 to 12 weeks apart. In a lot of cases, you're having those 4 times a year, which when you think about, If I own a business and I am employing, hundreds or thousands of people, that is not a lot of opportunities for us to look at how we work together to improve 4 times a year. I would want to do that more frequently. And then if we start stepping up, and what we see with our sample pool here is the opportunity for that frequency to go up gets even more infrequent. So almost none of us said that we see this at the organization level. A few people said kind of at the portfolio level. So the frequency that this feedback is going up gets smaller and smaller and more spread out. And I think what sucks about this is you might have a huge data pool at the team level, but that gets, when we're only reviewing that going up, and the frequency that we're reviewing that feedback going up is less and less and less, our opportunity for overreaction increases. And so I don't know if anyone else has felt this, but I've been in some very cool organizations over the last couple of years where I feel like the leadership team is very receptive to feedback, but almost too receptive to feedback. And I'll hear things like, we'll bring something up around one team, or we'll say, this came up in the retros for the last PI, like this is a common pattern, and this is something we feel like we need to address, and they change things immediately. And there becomes a kind of a double-edged sword here. There's a fear from the teams of escalating things and saying things because they don't want the business to overreact. And the business feels like, well, we only hear feedback once a quarter. Like we only hear something is broken 4 times a year at best. So when we hear something's broken, we got to change it immediately, or they're going to feel like we're not listening. And so when you think about this imbalance of frequency of feedback, it creates this unhealthy need to respond to everything and then to stop escalating things because they're overreacting or over-responding to things. So think about what you're doing at a team level and think about how you can bring that level of data collection. And I'm going to say, make a big pool here, make a big data pool. I feel like Lynn, there's probably better terms for this. I need your data hat, your data hat help. But if you can think of this as gathering a lot of data, the more samples we have at a team level, we need to keep that level of data collection as we move up this chain of feedback, so that it's not that we're overreacting to what happened 3 months ago or over the course of 3 months, that we're collecting data all the time and creating a lot of visibility there. I don't think this has to be super high tech, to be honest. And Sally, you asked me for examples of how to do this in a virtual setting. And I'm going to show you guys a screenshot of Scatterspoke because it's my 4th child and it's how I solve this problem. But I think this is a super hard problem to solve. And especially now that we're all distributed, unless you create space and time to do this on a regular basis, I don't think a tool will fix this for you, right? There has to be a drive, I think, to say, we're going to get together, we're going to review this, we're going to do this on a regular basis with program leadership, portfolio leadership, and even executive leadership once a month, right? And it doesn't have to be a super time intensive event. I think that that's also sometimes does us a disservice for all of our retro events to be like a scale. The more we scale in the organization, the more it scales in time and labor. Figure out a way to roll this up. Figure out a way to roll up keywords, right? Or key events and patterns that you're hearing. I heard the term, I'm already going to forget it. It was a frustration trigger, basically. So what are the frustrations that you see across teams and the successes you see across teams? And how do you bubble those up maybe once a month and have them go to your leadership, executive leadership, right? Here's the things teams are feeling pain with. Here's the things that the teams are feeling success with. Action's not required. I think that's an important part here. Action's not required. But here's what we want you to know. We want you to have visibility into these things over time so that after 3 months, you can make a decision because you have all this data available to you on what's the right things for us to act on as a business, not responding to one set of data because that's how often you're getting it. Okay, let's talk power. I said I had a hard time with this word. I still do. I played around with a lot of different words here and I came back to power, and here's why. What we mean by power, right, is the rate at which that feedback gets transferred. And I thought about volume, and I thought about amplitude, and I thought about all these different words. But in some ways, that transfer of feedback also implies power in the organization. And I wish that it didn't. But what I hear so often with teams is we don't have the power to fix this. We don't have the power to address this. We need, somebody else has to come in, whether it's tools or money or org changes. Sometimes the things that need fixed require power. And so I came back to this, even though I struggled with it. And I think when you think of feedback getting transferred up the organization, you have the frequency part of this, but power is the other part. So think of these dots, right, as like they're your conductors of energy in this grid. And we conduct them up, right? At what point in this chain does your feedback lose volume or lose power? And there are a lot of shitty reasons that this can happen. Like, I think it can be fear more often than not, where a manager hears feedback from teams and they're like, this is going to reflect poorly on me and I'm not going to escalate this. I'm not going to share this because it's going to make me look bad. And I feel like I've seen that a lot in my career. I think there's also a little bit of fear sometimes in, if I bring this thing up, it's going to make my teams look dysfunctional, or it's going to make, they don't want to air their dirty laundry. I've also been told as a Scrum Master to stop airing a team's dirty laundry, which is always, all of these things are hard. We're trying to fix things and address problems and work through these frustrations. It's hard to do if we can't talk about them. So how in your organization can you increase volume and increase the power of that feedback up that chain? So think about the vibration there, the frequency, and then the power up this chain. And so our goal is, how do we use this volume all the way up so that things get heard? There's a ton of blog posts and webinars and all these different things on what to do in a retro when your team stays silent. And it's like, add more games, right? Add icebreakers, be quiet and make it just super awkward till someone talks. I've tried all these things. I think one of the things that often drives that silence that's the hardest to fix is this. And it's that a team feels like they keep having the same conversation and there's no one's listening, right? No, it's not going anywhere. And in some ways, I think we own a lot of responsibility there as a Scrum Master. You think of yourself as that light blue line, right? You're the conductor. And so how do you take that feedback in a safe way? I don't want to go to my next retro recap and say, Lynn said she thinks that we don't have enough testers, right? I want to protect my team, and that's always what we're trying to do. But how do I make sure that their frustrations and their concerns are being heard so that they can be acted upon? Because if the team keeps having the same conversation and nothing changes, they're going to stop talking. And I don't think there's any amount of games or icebreakers or silence that will fix that, unfortunately. So how do we fix this? I think the big part here is creating an easy way to elevate things. I like to have the teams pick. And so at the end of a retro, in addition to picking action items, I ask them, what are the things I can share, right? And what are the things I can elevate? Either to, they know, like I've worked with clients where we have a regular cadence for retro reviews with IS leadership or engineering leadership. And I'll say, what are the things I can bring to leadership for our team? And sometimes they're going to say no, and that's okay. That is up to them. But I want them to know that I'm willing to escalate anything that comes up in that retro on their behalf, because if I don't, no one will. So how do you create easy ways to elevate or promote concerns? I think the other piece here is when we think about how we review retro feedback. It's often at the end of a PI cycle, right? And I said like maybe that's every 12 weeks if you're in a safe environment. But how do you start to incorporate these reviews into things like roadmap planning or roadmap steering or strategic conversations? So it's not always bookended by delivery, and that's more frequent. So if you're using portfolio Kanban, like how can you talk about opportunities for improvement alongside product features or product ideas? How can you talk about these things that might be important for a team to dig into, things like tech debt or architecture or even slack in the system to respond to production issues? How do you start to fold those in so you're ranking those in the same conversation where you're prioritizing product ethics? And so I think that that's an important part of our cycles here that we tend to do at a team level, but get a little harder when we start to scale up. I also mentioned talking about awareness versus action. And this is language that I love to use with senior leadership to be able to say, I'm going to tell you something that the team talked about or that I keep hearing in our retros for awareness. I'm not asking you to take action. I just want you to know that this is a concern. And being able to draw that distinction when you talk to leadership, I think is critical in going back to what I was mentioning about that overreaction. Part of me, I think I've seen a few organizations now where I've been like, oh my gosh, I'm so amazed and so impressed with how responsive they are. And then I do get to the point where I'm like, I don't know if I should say this because I'm scared that they're gonna change direction so quickly. And so I've had to kind of teach myself, I think, when to say, this is awareness or this is action, and this is what I need from you. Or, there's lots of different, I think it's kind of a cultural conversation of like watch lists. I've heard companies call it watch list versus action items, but be aware of that. The more we elevate things, I think the more we have to have a structure in place for calling out the differences in what we're trying to bring attention to. But the most important part here is that we take action, right? So everything I just said about teams going silent or feeling like things are outside of their control or they don't have an opportunity to fix these things, I think the worst thing that we can do is create a structure and a process and a conversation and frequency and all these things for that feedback to move up in the organization and then not have anything happen. I do this a lot with portfolio Kanban. And when I'm helping organizations create a clear visibility for their portfolio Kanban, I like to have a discard lane or a discard bucket where if, let's say, we got an idea from marketing or sales, and we vetted that idea and we decided, you know what, this doesn't seem like something we're going to invest in right now. Make it clear to everyone that that was vetted and we tested it and we're moving it into the discard lane versus just taking it off of your board or hiding it entirely. And I think the same thing is true with these improvements. We need to close that feedback loop. So action is important, but if we're not taking action, if things have gone up the food chain and we've had a conversation about, teams are struggling with this and we think this is important, and an organization decides not to go that direction, that feedback needs to make its way back to the team, because nothing is worse than feeling like you have your chance at that soapbox and you're not getting heard. So make sure you're closing that loop. The bigger the loop is, the harder it is to close. But in a lot of ways, I think it's more important. I'm going to show you a quick screenshot. I don't want this to be a sales presentation. I'll show you what Scatterspoke does to handle this. We structure things. So on the right there, you see portfolio A, and then there's an art or a program with a collection of teams. And then any of the teams that have retros, they can promote cards up to the parking lot for the portfolio or the program level. So like in this example, you're looking at if team 2 had a retro, they can identify cards in their retro and say, I want to promote this up to the art. And then they get added here to the art parking lot. So in this example of portfolio A, the art can add cards to the portfolio parking lot over time. So depending on what your frequency is, you can collect all of this data over time around what the teams, like kind of scaled feedback, And then when you go to do your bigger retro, you have all this information sitting in your parking lot that you've collected from teams, and it doesn't say what team it came from. If anybody is interested, like I said, this isn't the intent of this isn't a sales presentation, but I'm happy to show anyone interested in a different setting. So let's come back to this. I said this at the beginning because I think this changed a lot of how I viewed the power of retro tools. So this engineering manager said to me, I had no idea how many teams were struggling with the exact same problem. How many of you think that's probably true in your organization, right? And when you think about how much information you're sitting on from retrospectives, it breaks my heart a little bit to think about over the course of my career, how many times I pulled sticky notes off a board and shoved them in a trash can at the end of a retro. And you're like, this was a great conversation. Because think about how much information is there, and think about when you compound that over 10 teams over 2 weeks and over 10 teams over 6 weeks, right? And all of this information we have, and it doesn't have to be super fancy tools. You can do this in a Google Doc, like with keywords, anonymous keywords, anonymous themes, but figure out a way for where you are to connect these dots and raise this conversation up. I think, you know, it's funny, I've learned a little bit of the hard way in Scatterspoke life about GDPR. And one of the things that we're constantly struggling with is organizations who want to talk about what data we're collecting. And it's always funny because I'm always like, well, we don't collect any data about your organization or your users other than what they provide. But in the back of my head, I'm also always thinking that's probably all of the data you don't want published anywhere, right? The data that all of your teams are sharing, you know, that all your teams are talking about is usually a little bit of that dirty laundry. And so how do you start to take that and do something with it so teams feel heard and teams feel like they have a chance to improve above the team level and scaling that up to the organization? That's everything I've got for you guys. Well, thank you guys for having me. My email is on that last slide. It's just Colleen@scatterspoke.com. If you have questions or want to talk about anything, or most importantly, if you have feedback for me, feedback, it's interesting. I did a presentation last year at Lean Agile US, pretty much right before the world shut down. It was like at the end of February. And one of the questions I asked everybody was around, would you rather give feedback or receive feedback? And everyone said receive it. And everybody was like, I hate giving feedback. It sucks. Like, it's uncomfortable. You feel like you're going to hurt someone's feelings. And it's so true, but everyone wants it. And so I always like to tell everybody, like, please give me feedback. It's bad feedback, good feedback. It's how we grow. And I can't get better at doing this if I don't hear what you liked and didn't like. So no hard feelings. Send it my way.
Yeah, Colleen, thank you so much.